Motherhood. 1 minute, you're mom of the year.
I love you, Mommy.
Then the next, not so much. From bath time to bullying, from potty training to puberty, parenting is full of challenges. But one thing is for certain, you are not alone. Welcome to Modern Mom Probs. I'm your host, author, mother, parenting expert, Tara Clark. Join me while we tackle today's modern mom problems. If there's one thing that you know about me is that I am absolutely obsessed with the brand Cozy Earth. I wear their joggers during the day, almost every single day. And then at night, I sleep in their matching pajamas. I always wear the full pants with the long sleeve. It makes me feel very fancy and it keeps me cool at night. I sleep on Cozy Earth sheets with a Cozy Earth duvet cover. Like if there was a person that was a walking billboard for Cozy Earth, it would be me. It's actually a running joke between me and my husband because it's literally the only brand, not only that I wear during the day, but I wear at night and I sleep in at night. And the reason why is not only because it feels luxurious, but because it keeps me cool at night when I sleep. Because sometimes, ladies of a certain age may happen to be prone to night sweats. But the sheets are so soft and they're so snuggly that I get a great night's sleep every night between my sheets and the duvet cover, and it wraps me up and I just feel like I'm in this absolute beautiful cocoon of just cuddliness and perfect sleep. It's so soft. It feels so luxurious. I can't even begin to tell you how much I enjoy the Cozy Earth products. So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because right now, Cozy Earth is running a special deal that if you use my code MMP, you can get 40% off their best-selling sheets, pajamas, and more. Trust me, you will not regret it. I am the walking billboard for Cozy Earth. And if I could impart one thing for you, you could afford it and you're worth it. Use my code MMP for 40% off. Hey friends, welcome back to Modern Mom Probs. I am so happy that you are here today. Thank you for coming along with this podcast journey and this motherhood journey as well. Today we're talking about something that I don't know how I have not covered this before in the 150 episodes that we've done so far together. I don't know how we haven't talked about Matrescence. Matrescence is the transition to becoming a mother once you've had the baby. And I feel like I see it often, I read about it often, and we've never covered it on the show. So I'm so thrilled to be introducing and interviewing Jessie Harrold. She is a writer, a teacher, a coach, and a doula. She recently wrote a book called Mother Shift, Reclaiming Motherhood as a Rite of Passage. We're going to be talking about that transition, bouncing back, diving into some of the science, talking about what it is and what it isn't, and losing yourself in motherhood and gaining yourself in motherhood. All of this conversation is something that until recently, I didn't know had a word attached to it. Obviously it does, and we're going to be talking about that. So Jessie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to be chatting about this because this is actually a topic that I haven't explored on the podcast yet. And as I was doing my research for our conversation, I thought to myself, one, how haven't I? It's long overdue. So I'm glad that we're going to be speaking about this and sharing about it. And two, it's something that a lot of moms experience, but don't necessarily know the name for it.
Yeah.
Or don't have the words to describe their feelings. So with that being said, let's talk about this mother shift.
Yeah, totally. So Mother Shift is the name of the book that I just released about the experience of matrescence. So matrescence is the word that we use for the transition into motherhood. And it's a word that was coined back in 1975 by a social anthropologist named Dr. Dana Raphael. And she Yeah, she said, listen, like there's more to becoming a mother than just having a baby or having a baby come into your life. And it takes time, and we need to study this. And then, as with so many women's and mothers' health and wellness issues, this whole kind of field of matrescence went underground and kind of disappeared from the academic sort of consciousness until very recently. And finally, now there's some more study about it and a better understanding of what matrescence is. But essentially, it describes all of the changes that happen to you when you become a mother. So it's biological, it's psychological, it's sociological, social, it's economic, it's sometimes spiritual for mothers, all of these shifts that happen. And in my work, and some of what, I talk about in the book, is that this transition actually takes 2 to 3 years to complete. Yeah. So we talk about that first 6 weeks, which is kind of like this very medicalized concept of like, maybe the healing period after birth, and maybe you go see whatever medical practitioner or health practitioner that you might have seen for your birth to go get, they're like, okay, you're a mother now? I don't know. And thankfully in sort of the last 10 years or so, we've been talking more and more about the 4th trimester, or that sort of first 3 months postpartum, and acknowledging that that's a thing, that's a, important time of, healing and physical and emotional kind of upheaval and reorganization sometimes. But there's more to it than that, right? And I think, like you said, we all, I think, experience this to some extent. And when we don't have language for it, then we sort of assume that we're going through it in isolation, or that, so many mothers that I talk to feel like they must be broken in some way because they haven't, like, quote unquote, bounced back. Nothing feels back to quote unquote normal. And so there can be this real sense of disorientation. And then not only that, but feeling like there must be something wrong with you because you're so disoriented by this transformation.
Yeah, I think disoriented is a really great word to use. And I would not have thought to use that myself, but that's like really what it is. Your body is trying to heal from it, and you're having lack of sleep. You're trying to eat properly, like all of those things. You're just so discombobulated during that time. And you're trying to make sense of things while also now taking care of this new baby. Yeah. And, people always say, like, there's no manual for that. And so all of a sudden your whole world, in a good way, I guess, is turned on its head. And so now you're trying to reorient yourself to this new normal, this new life.
Yeah, totally. And I think, so many of us assume that, becoming a mother will be sort of like me plus a baby, right? Like that.
Right. Yeah.
And we talk about it as sort of a series of changes to the things that you do, behavioral changes. Like, I'm going to learn how to change diapers now. I'm going to learn how to brew much stronger coffee. Right.
It's true.
And it's like a bunch of skills that you can learn. And then, once you learn them, and maybe you get help from, a doula or a lactation consultant or something like that. But once you learn those skills, then you've made it somehow. But actually, the transition to motherhood is more than just a bunch of behavioral kind of skill type shifts. It's this change in your identity. And I always talk about how, our lives are ecosystems, right? We have all of these different kind of roles and responsibilities and realities. We have relationships, we have jobs, we have like places that we live, we have families, we have all of these things. And actually becoming a mother shifts every single one of those moving pieces in that ecosystem. And so, yeah, you might feel differently about your career. You might you'll probably feel differently about your intimate partnership if you're in one, you know. You'll probably feel differently about your relationship with your own mother. That's a big one. And your friends, and, you know, your values might change. And so, yeah, it's this big upheaval. And when we come to expect that either you shouldn't change in motherhood, because we have this real rhetoric around like, motherhood shouldn't change you, right? You don't want to lose yourself in motherhood. We have this kind of rhetoric like that. Then, you know, again, we experience all these changes and feel like we must be doing it wrong somehow.
Yeah. Let's explore that a little bit. I see that a lot on Instagram.
Yeah.
Where people are saying, and I guess, you know, there are two schools of thought behind this, but the rhetoric does tend to be, don't lose yourself in motherhood. You're still a person. You still have an identity. What do you say to that?
Yeah.
Especially in the book, because I know you carve out time to talk about that.
Totally. I talk about it a lot. I kind of say losing yourself in motherhood might not actually be the problem. It might actually be the point, you know, and I think that there's a lot of nuance here, right? I think that there is a season of early motherhood where we do have to surrender a lot, you know, and I see mothers who are trying to kind of push back into that sort of pre-babyhood reality and suffering and really struggling because it's just not the time for it, right? And also, you know, we have a lot of societal conditions, you know, a lack of adequate maternity leave, unaffordable childcare, and all of these other things that are not great, that are contributing to this feeling of lostness. So there's a real balance here. There's sort of a certain extent to which motherhood has always asked us to surrender a lot, put some things on pause, shift gears, slow down. And that was true for our ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
We became mothers. And there are these sort of modern societal conditions that make becoming a mother particularly hard in this time and in this culture. And we want to, you know, fight back against those things. And, you know, to the extent that those are the things that cause us to lose ourselves in motherhood, of course, you know, let's not surrender those. But I think that, you know, the missing piece here for me, and what I talk about extensively in the book, is that we don't really have the skills or the capacity or the language for grief and the feelings of grief that come up when we're asked to let go of parts of ourselves we'd really rather not. And yes. Right. And I think we only talk about grief within the context of death and bereavement. And we don't actually give ourselves permission to grieve all kinds of things that we might feel a sense of loss over. The truth is, anytime we move into a new identity, anytime we make a change in our lives, we're being asked to let go of the person we used to be. And, you know, I often say that you can't do the growth without the grief. Like, you actually can't move into what's possible for you as a mother, as a human who happens to be a mother, without letting go of some of those aspects of your pre-motherhood identity. You know, so there's a lot there. And I think that, you know, giving ourselves permission to kind of feel the full spectrum of feelings that we have. There is this experience of what is called ambiguous loss around motherhood. And ambiguous loss was originally a term that was coined to describe the feeling of bereavement and grief for families who had whose loved one was MIA. So they didn't know that if they were like grieving a death, or if they were hoping against hope that their loved one would return. And that's how I think early motherhood feels. Like, will I ever run a marathon again? I don't know. Am I grieving this part of myself forever? Or 5 years from now, will I find myself at that start line again? You know?
Yeah.
And we don't know. And it's really, really tough. And so I think we can all really benefit from kind of expanding our definition of what we get to grieve, what we're allowed to grieve. And imagine that you might grieve and be sad about what might otherwise look like a perfectly kind of happy, healthy, wanted motherhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's beautifully said. You said something that really struck with me. You said, give yourself permission. And a few months ago, I was on a panel called Permission to Pivot, and I was sharing my story, and I'm going to share it with you now. When my son was born, or before my son was born, I worked at Nickelodeon, and I loved working at Nickelodeon. It was the most talented, creative people. It was a great company. We had lots of fun. We were doing good work. And at the same time, I was trying desperately hard to conceive and have my son. And this was happening for 3 years. It's a very long story. That's a whole nother podcast episode altogether. But finally, I got pregnant, had my son, and now I was faced with the question of, do I go back full time to a company that I loved and, trying to pursue the career there, or do I stay home with this baby who I loved so much and I tried so hard to have, and now we had him. And I'll never forget, I was speaking with my manager at the time. I was still on maternity leave. This was maybe the week before I was supposed to come back. And she also was a young mother of not a young mother, but she was a mother of 2 young children at the time. I think she maybe had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old at the time. And we were talking about it, and I said, I would love to come back part-time. And she said, no, it's all or nothing. And this was, 12 years ago. Hybrid didn't even exist. Remote work was not really a thing, especially at Viacom at the time. And so she said, it's all or nothing. And I thought about it for a second. And I knew that I had the pressure of living in New York City at the time. You're sort of expected to go back to work. You're expected to get childcare, all of those things. And I said, you know what? No. She said, it's all or nothing. And I said, okay, it's going to be nothing, but it's going to be all my son. And so I chose to stay home with him full time. Also, economics played a part into it because childcare is so expensive that your take home money would be so much less. And so I said, I'm just going to stay home with him and give him everything I have and soak up all the love and the cuddles and hugs and giggles and all of that. And I'm very grateful for that. But to your point, there's sort of the grief of the loss of who I was working at that wonderful company before he was born, because even if I did go back there full time, it would not have been the same. It would not have been the same experience. And so I'm so grateful for the choice that I made to be able to stay home with him. And then also I'm grateful because then fast forward 3 years after that point, I started Modern Mom Probs and I started a whole career for myself. And so I'm very proud of that. And I'm proud of the work that I do here. And that would not have happened had I continued working at that other company. So yes, it's okay to grieve the loss of who you were or the opportunities that you may have had. But then who knows all of the wonderful opportunities that may still be in front of you. And so when I spoke at the Permission to Pivot event and I shared that story, people came up to me and said, oh, that resonated with me so much because I was faced with similar sort of questions when my son or when my children were born, and I didn't know which way to go one way or the other. Now, again, I was lucky enough and privileged enough that I didn't have to go back to work right away, and that my husband was able to take care of us on one paycheck at the time. But again, that's because we weren't paying for childcare. It would have been a different thing. It would have been quite strapped. But it's an interesting story, and I'm sure it's not in isolation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, something very, very similar happened to me when I had my second child. I was working in government for a public health department. You would think that that would be the most conducive place to have a baby. And
you would think so.
You would think. And when I was pregnant with my son, so my second kid, my eldest was a toddler, 2.5, and my husband, who's in the military, was deployed for 6 months. So I took a pregnancy test over the phone with him at his first week of deployment, and we were like, uh-oh, this
Oh
was
my
not
goodness.
expected, right? And so here I was solo parenting for 6 months, pregnant, a toddler. Like, it was so much.
It's a lot. That is a lot.
It was a little dark at times. It was tough. And I remember going to my manager, and I was struggling a little bit, like, well, a lot actually, and really struggling physically and mentally. And I was like, okay, how can I help myself? Okay, I'm going to ask my employer if I could take like an hour-long lunch instead of a half an hour, and then tack the extra half an hour onto the end of the day. So not changing the length of my workday, so that I could go swim at the local pool. It was just up from my office at lunch hours. And I thought that is going to be the thing, because with a toddler and like no family or childcare, I couldn't really do much to move my body or care for myself when I was with her.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, hey, okay, this is what I'd like to do. And I thought it was silly to ask permission, because really it just seemed like the most obvious yes. But it was a no. It was a no. And it was that moment. So it was very similar for me. It was that moment that I was like, wow, here I'm, the conditions of motherhood for me have put me in a situation where I have very little childcare, and I need a lot of support, and I need at least to like move my body so that for my mental and physical health. And it was a no. And so like, I also, that's when I'd been working as a doula for many, many years at that point. And I decided, okay, well, like, let's just see if I can make a go of this full time. And that's when I kind of officially launched my business as well, like 10 years ago, when my son was born. And yeah, it was like, at the time it felt like I was giving the middle finger to like corporate, work and all of the constraints therein. And now I can, with distance and time, I can also see that there was a certain way in which I was being forced out of the workplace because I desired a level of like really reasonable, accommodation for my well-being. And it was not permissible. So it's like, it's tough, isn't it? It's like,
yes.
And I don't think anybody, any of us working mothers, are asking for the world.
No, we're really not. I was chatting with a good friend of mine the other day, and she works in an office that is, gosh, let's say maybe a half an hour from her house normally. It's off of a highway, and the highway that she uses to get there currently has, this sounds crazy, but it's true, an enormous sinkhole in it. So the road is closed. It's I-80, which is, to explain it, it's one of the biggest thoroughfares like in the country. It literally could take you from New York City to California. It is a major highway. Anyway, in this one particular area, it happens to have a big sinkhole. Therefore, it's closed. Therefore, there are lots of detours and back roads and everything. So she asked her boss, because she has to, so every day she's been getting to work late, because by the time she drops off her children at school and then takes the detours and then gets to work, she's late every day. So now they're starting to dock her PTO, her paid time, because of being late to work. It's the most mind-blowing thing in the world, because nowadays, I don't know, there's remote work, there's hybrid, all of those things. And some companies just force you to come into the office just because that's the way that it's always been. And so we're going to keep doing that, despite what a hardship it is for her to get there, given how ridiculous this sinkhole and these things are. And so many times I think the corporate world just simply has not caught up with the times. And sometimes it's also strangely the people that you would think are also the ones saying no. Like, for instance, when I had asked my boss and I said, can I work part-time? And she said, no, it's all or nothing. She herself was a mother of small children, and she said no. And then with my friend with the sinkhole situation, her manager is also a woman with children, and so it's one of those things where it's like, we're trying to work together here, guys. We're in this together. But sometimes their hands are simply tied, and there's nothing that, and I'm using this in quotes, there's nothing that they could do about it, because that's just the way that the corporate structure works, and it's sort of top down. But it's important that we're talking about these things, because for the people that are in power and that may hear this conversation or conversations like it, that they start to understand like their decisions matter, right? Taking my friend's PTO time because she's late because of a sinkhole, because she still is a mother and has to pack lunch for her kids and drop them off at school before she goes to work. She can't wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get to work to do that because her kids have to go to school at a certain time. It's those types of things that are often missed in the decision-making process.
Yeah, totally. And so, there can be all kinds of career shifts that then happen for us. And I think, the world, I think for a lot of us is not really set up to see us succeed in both our career and like, I even want to use succeed there pretty loosely because what is that anyways?
Right. We're just trying to get a paycheck too sometimes, but like
keep our heads above water.
Right.
And
exactly.
And like, parenting and career of any kind. And it's tough. I mean, even with the flexibility of being an entrepreneur, it's still impossible sometimes. It's just wild. And yeah, I mean, I think this is another area that a lot of mothers assume will remain the same. Like it's the same job and I'll continue on plus a baby. But it's not, it doesn't necessarily go like that.
Yeah. I'm so grateful also that in the last 10, especially 5 years since the pandemic, work opportunities or entrepreneurism is so much, has a lower barrier to entry. It's so much easier to get into now than it used to be. And so that's helping mothers across the country, across the world to make their own money, to have a sense of purpose outside of motherhood, in addition to motherhood, and be able to do a lot of really great work. And so I'm very grateful that has evolved the way that it has, because when I started my thing back in 2016, people were definitely making money online, obviously in blogs and the beginning of Instagram, but nowhere near how it currently is now. It's just, has exploded in the last, like I said, 5 years. I really like to think since the pandemic, it's really exploded. So I'm grateful for the opportunities that moms are afforded now, but of course there's still work to be done, but that's a different topic. I feel like that's a different one altogether though. I want to go back to this concept of the fourth trimester, right? Because even when my son was born, let's say 12 years ago, mm-hmm. I don't remember that necessarily being a phrase that was in my lexicon.
Yeah, no, it was probably about 10 years ago. So we just missed it. I have a 13-year-old. So like just missed it.
Yep. Just right there. Yeah. My little guy, he's 12 and a half. He'll be 13 in November. So
yeah, totally. So yeah, it's about 10 years ago. And there was a few kind of really seminal, books that were published. The Fourth Trimester by Kimberly Ann Johnson was published, I think it was like 2015. So maybe, it was about 10 years ago. And The First 40 Days by Hong Oh. And those books really kind of opened up people's eyes that there's more to this transition than just sort of, that immediate postpartum, and that there's a whole period of, physical and emotional healing that takes place. And then, so, matrescence, the way we're talking about matrescence now is sort of mirrors the way we were talking about the fourth trimester 10 years ago. So we're just starting to understand, and so 10 years ago, we were talking about the fourth trimester. And I would say probably in the last 5 years, I'm just throwing out numbers here, but probably in the last 5 years, things like, postpartum doula care have become like really viable. I want to say industries. That's the word that's coming to me. It doesn't feel.
No, it is. I would say that. Yeah, it's an industry. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really, and people see the value of it. So when, I remember like I've been a doula for 17 years. So there were some people doing postpartum doula trainings in the very early days, and people were like, well, why would you need that? It was very much like this fend for yourself mentality, and you should bounce back and all of this, right? And so now I would say there is this sort of idea that, you'll need extra care in those first 3 months, and you deserve extra care, and you don't have to do it all by yourself. And that it's a thing. It's not, it's an intense period. of time. And so the fourth trimester is getting that kind of, recognition now. And it's really, I mean, you and I travel in the same kind of communities, but it seems like it's something that we're all talking about.
Yeah. Luckily.
Totally. And matrescence, I think, is sort of like this next layer of like, this goes past and beyond that sort of physical and emotional healing and into, it's really, I talk about an identity shift, and I always say that mothers are asking the "Who am I now?" that question. Who am I now? That ... Who am I now that I'm a mother?
Yep.
And what does that mean for me? And so it's supporting mothers to do that work, and really what Mother Shift is all about is kind of giving them some of the tools and resources to help them through that, because we're starting to know that matrescence is a thing. Like we are getting to know the word a little bit, although if you hit the streets probably and ask people, most people would not know the word.
They probably don't. Like you said, like within our circles, yes, they do, because we're in the parenting industry. We're in the motherhood industry. So yes.
Totally. Yeah, a little bit more. But what we don't know so much about around matrescence is how it happens. We know that it happens. We don't necessarily know how it happens. Like what happens in that 2 to 3 years? What do I need to know? What can I expect? How do I navigate that? And that's what Mother Shift is all about. And talking about things like grief, for example. How do I navigate feelings of loss and sadness around my pre-motherhood identity, or around the parts of myself that are just not available to me right now? How do I sit in the liminal space, in the in-between of like, I'm not a mother, I've got a baby at my house now, but I haven't really fully stepped into this mothering identity. Like if you're at the playground and somebody calls out mom, you're like, who could that be for?
You're also turning around, but not because for you, you're like... I was somewhere the other day that someone called out mom, and I turned around. It was not my son. And I just laughed to myself because I was like, that's how I know I've been a mom a really long time now.
Yes, totally. Well, there's this kind of, so I notice, this sort of 2 to 3 year process that unfolds for us as mothers, there's no like definitive milestone that you successfully reach.
Check.
And then ta-da, I'm a mother now. But I describe it in Mother Shift. For me, it was this, it was the absence of longing for my pre-motherhood self. It wasn't necessarily it was the presence of things. It was the presence of a different sense of intuition and a different sense of empathy. And I had, creative, unlockings, I guess, in that motherhood time. So much had shifted, but also there was this sense of like, yeah, this is who I am now. And it's an integrated part of my identity. And I was no longer like yearning for those pre-motherhood days quite as much as I was in the very beginning.
Yeah, no, that really makes sense. And I do think 3 years old is probably about the time where I felt like really comfortable in my skin as a parent at that point. And I wasn't thinking about like going back to Nickelodeon for work or any of those things. I was like, that's behind me and that's fine. And now I'm going to look ahead to all the other opportunities or different life choices that we make. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, totally. I never really quite put like a time frame on it. And my son happened to be 3 years old when I started Modern Mom Probs. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm looking for something new now. Now he's like bigger and doesn't need me quite as much. Yeah, he's 3 years old. Of course, he needed me a ton, but not nearly as much as he did when he was a baby. And so that's when I was able to focus on some other things. It's funny, you had mentioned something about like, what do you want to do? And I have a friend, and I'm looking at her book here. It's like literally right here. And it's about when your kids are in high school, middle school and high school. And it says, what do I want to be when they grow up? Written by Karen Johnson. And it's another identity shift.
It is.
Once you're no longer in the trenches of motherhood, now they're more independent. They're about to, fly the coop, if you will. And in a good way, in a positive way, in a way that, you've helped them become independent, confident individuals. And now you say, okay, now what am I going to do? Now that they're 18 years old going to college, what am I going to focus on for myself? And that's another identity shift that now we're starting to speak more about it. And I'm grateful that we are. And I can see that even in myself. Like I said, I have a 12-and-a-half-year-old. Like, I don't need to help him as much as I did. I don't have to wipe his bum, like all the things that we needed to do at one point in our lives. They need us in different ways now. And there's an identity shift there too.
Yeah, totally. I work with mothers, like not just in this kind of matrescence time, but across the lifespan, and also women who aren't mothers. But, there are all kinds of different sort of thresholds that we cross in this journey, right? Maybe weaning, maybe going to, kids going to school, that threshold into adolescence and puberty, all of these kind of different, initiations, I guess, along this path. And what I really hope is that the work that we do in Matrescence, if we're really well supported, will help us to build what I call transformation literacy. So sort of like a sense of competence around all of the different transformations and changes that life will inevitably include. Because, we can, for example, those skills around grieving well and giving yourself permission to grieve and giving yourself space for that. Well, you're going to feel that as your child, grows up and changes and, eventually flies the coop, if that's what they do. All of these kind of transformations that we go through, we can apply what we've learned in Matrescence to those times and maybe navigate them with a little bit more ease.
Yeah. Jessie, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, and I'm super curious to see what your answer is. What do you think is the biggest modern mom problem today?
Woo!
It's a big one. That's why I always love to hear people's answers.
It's so true, right? Oh my goodness. I think, so I'm going to go with this sort of intuitive answer that just kind of came to me. But I want to say that it's silence and silencing. We've talked in this conversation about knowing, for example, that you have permission to feel sad and to feel grief about the transition to motherhood. Knowing that it takes 2 to 3 years in the first place and that there's a name for it, matrescence. Hearing about the challenges that you and I both had with, our careers and then eventually pivoting into something different. Like, there are so many of these experiences that mothers may be having, but don't know that they're normal, and they don't know that other people are also having them. And therefore they feel like they're wrong or broken in some way. I always say, you're not broken, you're becoming, right? And so I think there's this overarching problem of us not speaking of these things, not being honest about our experiences. I mean, we could go down this whole rabbit hole about how dishonest social media is oftentimes when it comes to, it can go both ways, but It can portray a pretty dishonest perspective of motherhood. And so I think that's what I would say is like, let's speak up and speak out and share our experiences and know that we're not broken, that there are so many other people who are experiencing the same thing.
I love it. I love it. Love, love, love. I could tell you already that's going to be the clip I'm going to use on social media. I already see it. That was fantastic. Anyway, Jessie, tell everyone where we can find you and where we could pick up your book.
Yeah, totally. So you can find me at jessieharrold.com. There's hundreds of blogs there and a newsletter that I send out monthly. I'm also on Instagram at jessie.es.harrold, and there are lots. And you can get my book, Mother Shift, Reclaiming Motherhood as a Rite of Passage, anywhere books are sold. And I always like to note that it is available as an audiobook, because what mother reads books anymore? That might be another one of those ambiguous losses. There will become a day when you'll turn the page of a book, but for now, maybe it's audiobooks, and Mother Shift is an audiobook.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Jessie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. What a great conversation.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Modern Mom Probs. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive in today's problem with me, your host, Tara Clark. Join me next time when I'll be interviewing another great guest and tackling another modern mom problem. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and a rating. As always, you could head over to Modern Mom Probs on Instagram and give me a follow, or check out my book, Modern Mom Probs, A Survival Guide for 21st Century Mothers, available online wherever books are sold. Well, that's it for today. See you next time, folks.
When we started writing our thoughts down on paper, it opened up endless possibilities. Ideas could grow beyond the borders of the mind, and it changed the world. Somewhere along the way, we lost touch with paper, distracted by devices made for every purpose except for thinking and focus. On edge, waiting for the next notification. But what if new technology didn't pull us away from paper, but brought us closer to it? Listen. That's not paper. It's the sound of the new Remarkable Paper Pro, rewriting the future. A paper tablet with a true color ink display, gentle reading light, and unheard of tactility. With digital features for taking notes, thinking, and organizing, without any distractions. Paper is about to change the world again. Get your paper tablet at remarkable.com today.
Hey, I'm John Ashton.
And I'm Neil Michaels.
And we are the hosts of the Approach Shot, the golf-flavored podcast.
Golf-flavored? What does that mean?
It means we talk with celebrities like athletes, actors, and authors about their careers, their passions, and what sets us apart, their golf game.
Hence the golf-flavored. Got it.
Yeah, we've had terrific guests like baseball all-stars Fred Lynn, Brett Saberhagen, Dale Murphy, Chris Sabo.
And football all-pros like Dwight Freeney, Lofa Tatupu, O.J. McDuffie, Jeff Garcia.
And from TV, how about Richard Karn from Home Improvement, Donnie Most from Happy Days, Ben Higgins from The Bachelor. You get the idea.
I certainly do. We have a lot of laughs, and our guests love to tell amazing stories. Join the fun by downloading an episode or 5 of The Approach Shot today.
Yeah, not today. Maybe tomorrow. Today I've got to wash my hair.
Really, John? Bragging about your full head of hair again?
Got it. You've flown it, man.
And if you don't?
Download the Approach Shot today on Apple, Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts.